Hey, podcast listeners, this is Nate from the Made It podcast. Wanted to reach out to any founders, growth marketers, sales leaders listening. We've made a community just for you, and we wanted to invite you to join. We have growth playbooks for you to use, instructional events, a few dozen every month to learn how to use the latest technology, even some free services that can be helpful to help your company grow. The first 1,000 people to join are free. We've created a link. You can click on it in the bio for this episode. We hope you'll join us over at our community.
We also looked at the industry and we weren't the scrappy upstart anymore. Bigger competitors had wised up to what we were doing and were sort of coming for our lunch as well. We saw the market being a lot more competitive.
Welcome to Made It with Connor Tomkies.
Hey, Nick, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I have to say, Nick, I think you have a gift for naming companies. I was looking through your LinkedIn. I'm like, Trumpet, that's a fun name. Like, what does that mean? And then I was going further down and it was Design My Night. And I'm like, what are you designing? Like, what is, what? I'm going to show up and what's going to happen?
I love that part, like naming companies, coming up with it. Trumpet works very nicely, especially for what we do, especially because we didn't want like a boring SaaS name, which lots of companies are. So we can have a lot of fun with Trumpet.
And I think you also had like an awesome reverse pitch because I sent you that email saying like, hey, the podcast. And you're like, also B2B software, Trumpet, you should check it out. And I'm like, oh man, Nick, this is awesome. This is really cool. So Nick, I'm happy to have you on the podcast. Essentially, this podcast is talking a little bit about what your exit is like and where you are kind of with your post-exit life. But also, I'm interested in learning, if you were to give an introduction for yourself that doesn't include the companies that you founded or those companies, what would you give for your introduction? What would you say?
I would say marketing guy at heart, brand focused. I love the startup community, loves helping and educating new founders, loves football or soccer.
I think that makes sense. One of the things that stands out whenever I talk to post-exit founders is that after they sell their company, there's a little bit of a transition as far as like, who is their identity? What do they want to be when they quote unquote grow up, right? And who those other things, right? The lover of like the startup environment and helping people grow their business, the lover of football / soccer, like those things are even more important after you sell a company just because of that transition period.
Yeah, definitely. We're so pegged to being the founder of X business. That is your identity, because it's so all consuming. So when you don't have that, yeah, you're like, who am I at my core, I guess? Yeah, it's very rare, I guess, as adults that you have the luxury on the one hand of not needing to work, but then also not working, especially I think people like us that are just constantly on the go. So to then wake up that morning and have nothing to do, no emails or no responsibilities, it's quite disarming, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, your company got pretty big. It had a lot of people that were involved. Mind sharing a little bit around how big did the company end up getting and what were you designing?
So yeah, when we sold, we had about 100 people. We sold it for north of around $35 million. So the Design My Night, essentially like an open table, but for nightlife. So sort of bars in the UK, pubs, rather than restaurants. And it started just as like a discovery platform because in the UK, actually, we only really had time out. But then we sort of pivoted to SaaS. So then we built a reservation software, but just for bars and pubs, and then left Open Table and Book a Table and Resi and all those to fight over restaurants. Everyone had left bars and pubs. And it's a very different booking need to book into a bar versus a restaurant. So we built a very flexible software that basically when bars saw it, they were like, yeah. So we sort of quickly, signed up the bar scene in the UK. Then we built a ticketing software to compete with like Eventbrite and Ticketmaster. Again, more in our space. So for like pop-ups, small festivals. Again, like flexibility, great customer service, that Eventbrite and Ticketmaster, etc. didn't have. And then, we sort of ran those two in conjunction. They're like the B2C website, which got very big. And then the SaaS component as well. And it was, our first startup as well.
Whenever I think about going to see a bar, I don't think about having to reserve a stool for a cocktail or for a beer. Is that a thing that's unique to the UK, or is that something where you found this gap in the market and you're like, I'm going to fill this gap?
We sort of made that market happen. So the timing was right. So it was sort of launching, especially in London, like the cocktail bar. They were run like restaurants. So, you would book a table, you had the table for a few hours. They were very busy. They had wait lists, etc. But still needed flexibility that restaurant software didn't offer. So we started in that area. So if you think of like the top 50 bars in New York, the top 50 bars in Chicago, you would need to book. And then you had all like the more fun, casual bars. But we sort of went to the market and said, look, pre-booked revenue is very important, but you don't do it at the moment because you don't know how to manage it. And you haven't got a software that can help you manage it. And you see software as a problem. Let's give you a software that's going to make that easy for you. But then we said to the consumer, you're used to just showing up at a bar with your backpack on, trying to find a stool. But what if we told you could book for your 4 friends, those 4 stalls or the booth or whatever? And then when you put the two together, it sort of carved out that market.
Did you go bar to bar essentially and sell this? How did you get into the bars in the first place?
Yeah, at the start, it was very much boots on the ground. Every weekend, we would go in there probably a few hours before they were opening. You knew you'd be able to get hold of the manager, but they weren't like mega busy, and sounded them out about the industry. What problems are you having from a discovery point of view? Where do you list? How do you find new customers? And the sites that you use currently, what do you like? What don't you like? So it was very much boots on the ground, selling them our vision. And this was back in 2010. So, we were going in literally with like a 1-pager, not like an iPad.
Like printed out.
Yeah, literally like this is what we're trying to
like
build.
A bar napkin.
Yeah, exactly. Hospitality is very good for building relationships. So, if you're nice and you're trying to help their business, it's very conducive to that. It was very much every evening, every weekend, going in, trying to meet the managers. And in the early years, just hear their pains and how we could help. And then we sort of built especially the software off the back of all of that.
You ended up selling this, right, to the Access Group in 2017. What was that process like? How did you come to the conclusion that was the right time to sell?
We started it in like our mid-20s. So we sort of forewent all of our fun 20s because we were just working like non-stop on this business. And I think we were just, I think we were exhausted. We'd done really well. Andrew, my co-founder, and I had set a target of what we wanted from the business. We never wanted or needed this to become like a global unicorn. We had set our horizons on financial freedom. And we actually did the exercise of what financial freedom looks like for both of us. And luckily, we were quite aligned on that. So on the one hand, we were actually very methodical. And we were like, well, look, if we can get it to this number of revenue, we know that the multiples in hospitality SaaS are this, which means we could exit for maybe this, which means we would get this back in our pocket, which is the money we want. So a year out from hitting that ARR target, we sort of started speaking to the market. We actually did it very formally. So we engaged a broker who actually did like a 7-month process from interest, signing the docs, to then taking us on the journey of exiting the business and signing the docs with them. We also looked at the industry and we weren't like the scrappy upstart anymore. So, the bigger competitors had wised up to what we were doing and were sort of coming for our lunch as well. So we saw the market being a lot more competitive. So we thought it needed a home, someone that had a lot more cash than us as well.
You are probably the first person I've talked to that was as aware as they are as far as this is what I want from the business. This is the revenue I need to hit to get the multiple that I want to be able to have that exit. You're probably the only one I've talked to that has done that reverse math for their first company. Like usually after you exit the first time, you have enough awareness that you understand where you are and what that exit might look like. That's pretty unique. Is that something that you got advice on from like another entrepreneur, or is that something that you were just able to work backwards from?
I think we were just both very transparent in what we wanted from the business. Like Andrew and I are quite unique in the founder world that we're like not romantic about it. We didn't just want to start a company because we wanted to do our own thing and change the world. Actually, we want to do it because we want to do our own thing and have some fun, and we didn't want to work for corporates anymore, which is where we did work. And we trusted ourselves that we were the right two people to build something. But then we were, very clear with each other on that we wanted financial freedom from this. We didn't want to run this forever. And in our heads, we were like, we're still young. If we exit when we want and we get the financial freedom, that then opens up the next part of our life where you haven't got the stress of finance, so which hopefully allows you to then be a bit more free to decide what you really want to do.
I mean, getting that first exit early on is a superpower. Like, it sets you up in a very unique way, and it changes your perspective on any business that you start after that first one. How was that earnout period? Because you stayed with the parent company for a while. So what were you doing for them, and how was that experience?
So we had a 2-year earnout. It was revenue targets as well. It was very strange because we'd built this brilliant culture. This was pre-COVID, so we had like a really cool office in Shoreditch in London, which is like the cool tech scene area. And then the company that bought us are like a UK unicorn, but like an unsexy one. So people hadn't heard of them, but like a very well-run company. The founder had set it up in the 90s, was still there, but a lot more old school than the way we do it. And they had a hospitality vertical, so we fitted very nicely into that. So we sort of just had to get our heads around the fact that we had to say yes to things from them, but also we were quite strong-willed that we had targets to hit and we knew how to run this business and they didn't. So I think it was a balance of letting them win on some things to keep the corporate side of them happy. You know, they did own us now. But on the second part of it, being very strong-willed that, well, look, we know how we need to grow this business over the next 2 years. So you're either going to help us or give us obstacles. If you want to help us, but let us crack on. If you're going to give us obstacles, we're going to push back on them. So we got on fine with them, but it was a bit push and pull. And obviously, our team was quite young as well. So helping them understand what the next chapter looked like for them. You know, suddenly they were being part of a big company. So it was showing them the perks of working for a big company, while it was also Andrew and I's job to keep that startup spirit. And we kept our office. It was a very like push and pull sort of 2 years, but we did hit the earnout in the end, so everyone left happy.
When I talk to post-exit founders, a lot of them regret having an earnout in their contract, and they're like, avoid the earnout. And for many cases, I can see why that might be true, because you can't control so many things, and you especially can't control if you don't own the company. So there's things that could happen on a macroeconomic level inside your industry or your niche or your vertical, and then inside the company, the dynamics as far as how they allocate resources. And so there's like 3 different dimensions that you have to kind of like account for in addition to running a successful company inside another company. You mentioned it was challenging and it was hard, but you're also one of the few people that were able to hit their earnout target. Do you have any pieces of advice as to should you avoid an earnout altogether? Or if you do have one, this is what I recommend.
I mean, look, the dream is you don't have an earnout, but you know,
Right.
I think if you put that stipulation in, if you'll have to accept a lower valuation. Our deal structure was X% upfront, X% on the earnout, which was negotiated as part of the deal. You know, I think if you're selling, you know, for anything over, let's say, you know, $20 million, I think you've got to expect that your purchaser is going to want some form of handover or reassurances about what they're buying and the team that they're buying, unless it's just buying you for parts or an acqui-hire. So I think we would have loved like a year, but then, you know, as part of negotiation, we negotiated that it was revenue, not EBIT. So, you know, I think if you're doing an EBIT earnout, you might then get hamstrung by what they allow you to spend. It can cause friction, but revenue, we just sort of knew what we had to do, how we had to grow the business. And what it does is it really focuses your mind, not necessarily on the good of the long term of the business, but for us, it was how do we grow revenue? And if things were being brought to our table by the team that was either too long term or wouldn't help grow revenue, it was a no. Whereas if that was 5 years ago, we would look at it more strategically and say, okay, yes, strategically, that makes sense. Let's work on that project. So we became very revenue focused, which is no bad thing, and looked at all the things we could do to quickly uptick revenue across the business. Another tip, which was from our lawyers, actually, we had good lawyers on the deal. They put a clause in the contract. I don't know the exact wording, but it was something like, if the parent company materially changes any part of the acquired company, the full earnout has to be paid. What this clause obviously allowed us to do is have that protection. So if the buying company came to us and were like, you can't hire these 5 people that you had forecasted, or I think we should change your business model to this, we could just throw that clause at them and say, well, we'll do this, but that's materially changing our business and you'll have to pay us the full earn-out.
How would you define what's material and what's not material? Very subjective, right?
Yeah, which was quite nice that we had that in because we could be quite subjective with it. So at times it got a bit heated because they were like, well, we want you to do this. And we're like, well, for us, that's a big material change in our business. Like,
you're stopping me from having my second cup of coffee this morning. That's going to impact my performance and this company's trajectory.
Yeah, exactly. I've run out of energy by 2:00. I think, look, it's a relationship thing. So we were there for 2 years. We didn't want to have this hell relationship with them. So
right,
it's like being in a relationship. So, some things we didn't love, but were fine. And we were like, look, let's just do that for their sake. But then other things we were quite strong on, we were like, well, no, this is when we can use that clause and say, no, we are not doing this.
There is a little bit of a balance, and you do want people to walk away happy with the transaction on both sides. Like, you want them to feel like your reputation is also at stake, right? Other people aren't going to want to do business with you or sell you their company if you don't have a good relationship with some of the previous companies that you've acquired. Nick, there's this story that I heard that maybe you might get a kick out of. There's an entrepreneur out of New York. I'll keep him anonymous for now, but he sold his company to a publicly traded company. But his lawyer added a clause that said, like, you're going to acquire us for this price, and we can't liquidate our shares because you're a publicly traded company, and there's this earnout period. But if your valuation goes down because part of the purchase price is in stock, then you have to increase the stock to match where the original price is. A year or two, like, you have to match wherever the price is. And like, lo and behold, like, the company's stock price tanks, and then the founder that got acquired ends up being the majority individual shareholder for this publicly traded company. Then the publicly traded company is like, we don't want to do this. Like, it doesn't work for us. And so now they're in a back and forth trying to navigate the nuance behind it. But I just thought that was really, really interesting.
That's crazy. It just shows you. And I think that's also a good illustration of you really don't know what's going to happen. So I think if you just go into an earnout with your eyes shut thinking, well, we just need to crack on like we have been for the last 2 years and everything will work itself out. You have to have all your bases covered. So, that's where having really good legal representation with a law firm that knows what they're doing in this space is so important. The agreement we signed on exit was like, 150 pages long. And I definitely didn't read it all back to front once. Very much relying on your lawyers to, highlight the stuff you're not sure about, highlight the stuff you should think about, and then obviously them giving their opinion on what they've seen in other acquisitions as well.
This is important, at least for our deal, is that we had a lot back and forth with their legal counsel and our legal counsel, and some of it was relevant, some of it wasn't. And we had them write out all the things that we called business terms or like key important terms. We had them put them all in the spreadsheet. These 27 terms we feel like are really important. And then from there, we could write the back and forth inside the spreadsheet versus doing the red lines back and forth in the contract where they get petty and they're like, they're adding their thing back in without like any commentary around it. But I think that probably saved us like tens of thousands of dollars is just by using a spreadsheet for the business terms versus a red line.
It does get crazy when you start marking up the contract. I'm also very sort of humble when I go into things. So, we said to our lawyers, you need to talk to us like we have no clue what we're talking about. So, you talk to me like I'm a child when it comes to explaining these clauses, and I'm not embarrassed by that because I need to.
In their head, they're like, we were already doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, ouch.
Yeah, we can't get any more simpler. They put it into ChatGPT now. The same with like accounting, like finance isn't my strong point. So, when I speak to the accountant or finance in my companies, I'm just like, don't talk to me like I'm the founder, like talk to me like I'm a child, because I want to understand it, but it's way beyond my comprehension currently. And I think that's very important to put your ego aside during an acquisition and, really trust the experts to get on with it.
Nick, I wanted to ask you about two also fun names. So Proud Ventures and then also Horseplay Ventures. Can you tell me about those two?
Horseplay. So Andrew, my co-founder from DesignMyNight's. So when we exited, we wanted to get into angel investing. Like I think most exited founders think that's just a rite of passage. So you exit, so then you go into angel investing. And what we wanted to do, like I'm a very brand guy, as I immersed myself into their angel world in the UK, obviously London especially has got, a great scene. I just discovered these brilliant, smart people that you just wouldn't have heard about, who were angel investors. So what Andrew and I wanted to do was, well, like, let's create like a brand around us as angel investors. So almost looks like a VC, but actually all it is it's not Nick and Andrew, random angel investors, is Horseplay Ventures, almost like our own family office. So all Horseplay Ventures is like our angel investing arm, and there's no fund or anything like that. It's just our own personal cash. But instead of just deploying it as Nick and Andrew, people come to us as Horseplay Ventures. And as part of that, we wanted to put in education. So, we created a website, and there's tools on there for founders, do lots of podcasts for founders and fireside talk. And it's much easier just to say Horseplay Ventures rather than like us as individuals. But yeah, it worked really well, to be honest. So, we got great deal flow. We've invested in 56 startups across the world now. Having a little break at the moment, actually, almost looking at that as our fund one. Let's see how that performs. We're probably about 4 or 5 years into that, with some in our mind that are going to do really well, which is exciting.
It's a fun concept, really like lighthearted and fun.
That's what startups is. Like you are messing around, especially in the early years. Like you've got no idea what you can put all the slide decks together you want. You can have your vision, but let's be honest, like especially on your first one, you're sort of messing around until you sort of, find traction. So we wanted to like evoke that we don't take ourselves too seriously, which we don't. And if you're not having fun doing this, so there's no point doing it. Go back and earn a good salary at a corporate job if you're not enjoying it. So that was sort of the premise of Horseplay. And then Proud Ventures is something more like personal to my heart. So as a gay guy, saw that there wasn't much representation of that in both the VC world and founders. Both are very straight, white, male, rich background industries, which is changing, luckily, especially sort of 5 years ago. There really isn't representation. The fact we still talk about women as a minority in this world is nuts, because
they're like technically they're like 51, 52%.
Yeah, exactly. So it's crazy, but it's good to see that changing. So from the Proud Ventures, it's a sort of London collective we put together of LGBT plus VCs and angel investors. So ones that work at VCs. And actually we uncovered there were quite, a few that sort of weren't out in their VC world because, they were concerned what people would think, which again is crazy in 2024. And the idea of that is just helping LGBT plus founders. So we throw events, we'll look at pitch decks. We don't necessarily fund. We don't have a fund or anything like that, but people are angel investors and work at funds. So we obviously have our own network. So, any great decks that we really like, we'll spread among our peer network. And it just, what we say to those founders is like, come and be yourself. Like we've spoken, we did a report in the UK actually that a huge percentage, unfortunately I haven't got the number to my head, was that if you're LGBT plus, you will sort of hide that part of you when you're pitching to investors because you think it would be seen as a negative. What we say to these founders is like, whoever you are, however you want to represent yourselves, that's great with us. So just come and be natural with us. That's your gift in our world.
Do you feel like it's for there to be more LGBT VCs as well as founders? Like, is it both sides of like trying to encourage them to like come to the table and co-invest together as a group or as a cohort, as well as helping enable these founders that are trying to find venture capital? Yeah,
definitely. I think it's just raising the conversation in VC land, because I said a lot of people in Proud Ventures work at VCs. So I think it's educating VCs that there's a lot of education about sort of ethnic minorities, and as I said, women, nuts, but they're LGBT plus, and it's not a competition between minorities, but that side of it, because I guess it's in some instances it's hidden, it's not as obvious, as if you're ethnically diverse or a woman. So it's often just goes untalked about because it's not seen as an issue. But it's such a small percentage of LGBT plus founders are backed, or a small percentage of LGBT plus founders that are happy to say that they are. It's saying to VC world, you need more representation of this community in your team as well. Because, if you do have a guy that wants to wear makeup on a pitch, he wants to feel comfortable with someone that understands him in that pitch. He might be the best founder you've ever met, but you will be judging him, whether you say you won't or you are. So it's about having other representation within your VC, because that will allow you to find more diverse founders.
What we're talking about a lot is almost like syndicates, right? Like you're building a syndicate to invest in a company or a portfolio of companies, and you're building like essentially a community or around a cohort of different companies, which I think is pretty exciting. Like you don't need to have a formal structure to be able to invest in these different companies. You can almost say, this is like our ethos or our values, and we're going to raise a fund around this. And you can find like-minded people to then invest in like-minded companies. And I think that's pretty cool.
A lot of the things I start with tend to be in the mold of wanting to help people and not trying to start a business as such. So, Horseplay is around angel investing, but we also want to educate. Proud, as I said, we haven't actually got a fund or even a formal syndicate at this stage. It's still just a network to help those founders, and then we will just pass decks on to our networks and not take a cut or a fee or any of that. So it's purely to help. It might become a world where we do have a formal syndicate or a fund or whatever. Where can you just help and make a difference? I'm not a founder that's going to change the world, but I can help in little communities where I have a sphere of influence.
So tell me about Pitch Deck Pod. What's the premise?
That's my podcast. It actually started in lockdown, as I'm sure lots of people did with their podcasts. The first premise of Pitch Deck was actually having loved Shark Tank. It's Dragon's Den in the UK, but watching it purely as entertainment. But seeing very quickly the founders I spoke to who weren't very well networked watched Dragon's Den or Shark Tank thinking that's reality. And, thinking you're going to raise $50,000 and give up 50% of your business. You get on national TV, and obviously in Shark Tank, it's a bigger viewership, but, that is not, it's entertainment, and it's great entertainment. I just wanted to do something a bit more realistic. The first premise was have a pre-seed, so an early stage founder pitch for 5 minutes to myself every episode, and then I'd bring in an angel investor or an early stage VC next to me. They would pitch for 5 minutes. We cut them off after 5 minutes. And then we would basically have a live Q&A as if you were speaking to an angel investor on that 30-minute call. So we would just ask all the questions we would ask if that was a normal angel investor 30-minute call. They either answered very well or they didn't answer very well. And then the last 5 minutes, just myself and the investor had a chat, like what we liked, what we didn't like, how they could have improved. And the premise was just to sort of open the lid for founders on what that first 30-minute meeting with an angel or an early stage VC might look like. What are the types of questions they ask? What are they interested in? It was often very interesting when I had a VC with me, the questions they would ask versus me as an angel. We've obviously got very different needs and requirements. So we did that for 3 series, did really well. Then I've started my new business. So the time it takes to put that show together, I was doing it all myself, was long, because you obviously have to find founders that have an interesting business that are confident to pitch and have a live Q&A. And then on the other side, investors that are confident enough to do a live Q&A. Pivoted it slightly at the moment to just be 25-minute conversations with early stage investors. And that can be an athlete, that can be an angel, that can be an early stage VC. I don't care who you are, but if you invest in early stage, and just what do they look for? What do they like? And sort of build up a bank where founders can listen to from all different types of early stage investors on sort of what people look for at that time. And it's bite-sized, so it's like on purpose, I do it for 25 minutes. Hopefully they learn something within those 25 minutes.
It takes a decent amount of time to raise that capital or to hone in that pitch that could be used on you could have been on the market. How do you feel about the difference between like a VC company that needs that capital to grow versus a bootstrap company that can maybe get to their first 5 million solo?
I'm a big advocate of bootstrapping, and DesignMyNight was that. So we only ever raised £500,000 throughout our whole life cycle. So, you could say that was bootstrap. My new business, Trumpet, is VC backed, pre-product, pre-revenue. So 2 very different journeys. So I'm seeing both sides. Even like a company that I think could be suitable for VC, I always will advise the founders to not dive straight into it. Get some semblance of traction or a market need for your product. And I'm just a huge advocate of the angel community, to go out and raise $100,000, $200,000 to get that traction, to get that product to market. will just set you up so much better when you're talking to VCs. A lot of VCs say they're pre-seed, but actually very, very few are genuinely pre-seed, pre-product, pre-revenue, really understand what pre-seed is. So if you can go to VC with some form of traction and, you raise that angel round, you can do it at a quick and dirty, I call it. So, give them a good valuation, but you're only raising a small amount, so you're not giving up much equity. And then when it comes to your VC round, your pre-seeds, you can get a much better valuation than you would ordinarily. But the other side of it, I say to founders is, what is it? 0.009% of companies are suitable for VC. Like, you don't have to become a unicorn for you to be a success. So like we said at the top of the show, when Andrew and I were looking at Design My Night and our exit, our financial freedom was nowhere near having to have a unicorn. You really need to decide that what do we want from this business? Like, do we want a lifestyle business where I can take $500,000 a year from it and live a really comfortable life doing something that I really enjoy? Do I want to exit for $10 million but own 90% of the equity and have life-changing sums of money? Or do I want to go and build a unicorn and, eventually exit with hundreds of millions of dollars? I think we're just bred in the startup world, very like TechCrunch, that you celebrate fundraisers and you celebrate unicorns, but you don't really celebrate like a Design My Night exit. Got no press anywhere, but we changed an industry in the UK. Us as founders had a total life-changing exit. We were able to give money to all of our staff, some for life-changing money as well, and has now enabled us to go on to this, the next phase in life. So for me, that's a huge success. Whenever I invest in a company as well as an angel, that's the first conversation I have with them. I'm like, look, you've got my money now. You can cut the crap. What do you want from this? Do you want a 20 million exit? Because I'll be happy with that because I've come in at 2. So that's still a good return for me. And if you want 20 million, let's work together on how we're going to get you that 20 million. Or do you want to go and be 100 million, billion? Okay, well, that's a very different path. Let's look at that.
Out of the companies that you've invested in, what are some of the ones that you think stand out at the moment, or some of the ideas that you think might be exciting to talk about?
There's a company in the UK called Honest Mobile. So that is a phone contract. What they've tried to do is sort of bring Revolut ideas to phone companies. So it's who likes their phone company? You're on the phone to them for hours. They're putting your bills up. There's roaming charges now. They don't give you anything. And you think about that with the banking industry. And then, Monzo, Starling, Revolut came along. It's all app-based. There's perks. You can contact customer service in 20 seconds on chat. So they really brought that to the mobile phone industry where it's all app-based. You get a reply in 20 seconds. There's AI in there. They actually bring your bills down the longer you stay with them. They don't put them up. And they're being very forward thinking. So, they, one of the first with eSIMs and, they're, for example, they're looking at, okay, we can't give you free roaming in this country, but we will pay for you to use Google Maps and Uber because it doesn't cost us really hardly anything. But we'll give you free roaming on Google Maps and Uber because that's what you use when you're abroad.
This company sounds fantastic. Are they in the United States or no?
No, it's still UK. Doing really well. And it's called Honest Mobile because they also, so it's carbon negative as well.
How big are they?
They've got like tens of thousands of customers in the UK.
Okay.
It's still a long way to go because obviously it's a big industry to go after. Lots of competitors in the UK. I really like that one. There's another one called Fanbase, which... I describe it as sort of like the iOS for sports teams. So they're not looking at tier 1 sports teams. So they're not looking at like NFL or Premier League soccer. All the teams lower and university, basically they allow you to sell tickets. They allow you to manage your memberships, your corporate stuff, booking your rooms in there, CRM for your fan data. Because all the lower league teams just don't do any of this. It also has a white label app, so a sports team can have their own branded app for their fans where they can all engage, buy tickets, etc. Yeah, they're doing really, really well. And actually, I've just gone to the US and are speaking to college teams. Because obviously the college institutions you guys got are unbelievable, like the stadiums you've got and the tickets you sell for college. is
even our high schools have like $55 million stadiums.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was literally on an investor update call with them the other day, and one of the founders just moved over to the US, and he said, in our pipeline, you'll never believe it, we've got high school now that will probably be doing as much revenue as a second tier soccer team in the UK.
Our teacher pay, not so great, but our stadiums are fantastic.
Yeah. That blew my mind. So I think they've really found something, and obviously the market is huge, not just in the US, which we're discovering, and it's not just soccer over here. So, you know, basketball, rugby, hockey.
You're tapping into like these sub communities that are there, like they exist and they're passionate, right? But they maybe are not as coordinated. So
exactly.
I can see this being very much in your alley, right? Because you like sports, but also you're kind of building this community that's already there, but you're helping build it up, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like helping them act like a Premier League soccer team, but without having to pay millions of pounds for that. And I love those types of businesses, like finding these niches that the community is there, but for whatever reason are underserved. So yeah, they're doing a great job as well.
I really appreciate you joining, Nick, for the podcast. That's the pod. Where should people go to find you, Nick?
Best place to sort of connect with me is on LinkedIn. That's sort of the only social media I actually use in my life. So and I talk business on there. Give lots of education, I hope, on my current startup journey at Trumpet, but also what I've learned in the past and my angel investing as well. So yeah, I try and give a lot of education on there. So definitely connect with me.
That's awesome, Nick. Thanks for being on the pod.
That wraps up today's episode. For more inspiring stories and valuable lessons from successful entrepreneurs, be sure to listen and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and writing your next chapter.